Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It is good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Biden and Republican lawmakers are urging the country to get vaccinated as the federal government relaxes some of its COVID-19 guidance for after you've gotten your shots. According to new recommendations from the CDC, fully vaccinated people no longer need a face covering outdoors unless you're in a large group. President Biden framed the news as an incentive for the country to get a vaccine. Earlier, he called getting the shot a, quote, patriotic duty.
The bottom line is clear. If you're vaccinated, you can do more things more safely, both outdoors as well as indoors. Getting together with friends, going to the park for a picnic without needing to mask up. We're back to that place now as long as you get vaccinated. So go get the shot. It's never been easier. Go get your vaccination now. It's free and it's convenient. 90% of the American people live within 5 miles of a site where you can get a vaccination.
The vaccination push is not only coming from Democrats. On Tuesday, the Republican Doctor Caucus released a video from GOP lawmakers urging people to get their shot as supply starts to outpace demand in more rural states.
I come to you today not only as a United States Senator, but as a physician concerned for the health and safety of our nation.
And today I want to talk with you about getting your COVID vaccine.
And it's obvious to me from a medical standpoint, the only way to protect ourselves and your loved ones
and to end the government's restrictions on our freedoms is to take action and get the vaccine.
I hope you'll join me.
I hope you'll join me.
I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll join me along with over 100 million Americans
In choosing to receive the vaccine so we can throw away our mask and live life as free as we did before.
This announcement comes on the eve of President Biden's 100th day in office. He'll be giving his first joint address to Congress Wednesday. Mr. Biden is expected to unveil his new education and child care plan. This speech will be given to a limited audience in the Capitol due to coronavirus restrictions. As you can see from photos of the first joint address Mr. Biden attended as vice president in 2009, the House chamber is usually filled to the brim with lawmakers and guests, but there's not a lot of room for distancing at full capacity. Nikole Killion, Sarah Mucha, and Sarah Westwood join me now. Nikole is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Sarah Mucha is a political reporter for Axios, and Sarah Westwood is a political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. Welcome. It's good to have you all. Nikole, let me start with you. We know that President Biden will meet with Capitol staffers who were there during the January 6th insurrection. What are preparations like for this scaled-down event?
Well, as you can imagine, they're quite different from before based on the photo that you just showed, in the sense that the most noticeable difference will be the size. And we're only expecting about 200 people to attend the president's joint address. This will be a combination of congressional members from both parties, as well as just representatives from different parts of the government. For instance, with respect to the president's cabinet, we know that only a few officials will be attending on behalf of the entire cabinet. Same for the Supreme Court and the diplomatic corps. So really, you're just going to see a fraction of the numbers that you have seen compared to previous joint addresses or State of the Unions. The other major difference, of course, is the security posture. And as you know, the National Guard is still present here around the Capitol. As far as security, we know Secret Service will likely be handling the lead on this since this is a specially designated event, but U.S. Capitol Police did tell us that they are working with local and federal partners ahead of tomorrow night's address.
Well, Sarah Mucha, in the lead up to this speech, President Biden raised the minimum wage for federal government contractors. It's now $15 an hour, up from $10.95. He's also looking to beef up funds to the IRS, some $80 billion to crack down on tax evasion. How does it fit into the Biden economic philosophy?
That's right, Elaine. What we see with Biden, it's what he ran on as well, is this sort of nod to his political idols, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Dwight Eisenhower, and their sort of progressive economic views and sort of ideals for the nation. What we'll see in the family plan that he's going to unveil tomorrow is a sweeping use of government funds to enact change that the government or Biden administration believes is necessary, whether that's universal pre-K or paid family leave or an expansion of the child tax credit. Biden's economic philosophy is that federal aid should be ramped up, and aides have long said that government intervention can be good. Now, of course, the flip side of that is getting Republicans on board who may have a different philosophy, but we'll see how those negotiations turn out as we look toward the future.
Yeah, we're watching to see how far this note of bipartisanship actually extends, right? Sarah Westwood, let me ask you on a different topic here. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki did not refute a Washington Post report saying the president will raise the U.S. refugee cap. Now, the administration initially upheld the previous limit set by the Trump administration, but what led the President Biden to change course?
This has really been sort of one of the first big political messes of the Biden White House, because they knew they were going to face pressure from progressives to raise that refugee cap, but they suspected that the worst pressure would come from Republicans that were already hammering the White House over the immigration situation, over the way the Biden administration has refused to characterize the situation as a crisis, has sort of downplayed what is pretty evidently a bad situation of their own making in large part. And so they suspected that they were taking more of a risk politically by raising the refugee cap than by keeping it where it was. I think there was a sense that the progressive backlash they did end up facing when they kept that refugee cap at 15,000 was unexpected, and they're clearly reevaluating in light of that. This is also potentially the first big clash between the Biden White House and progressives, but is not likely to be the last, because there are a number of other areas where you do see some simmering tensions between where the Biden White House is a self-described centrist president trying to pursue a moderate agenda, and the far left, which has already sort of vaguely criticized the Biden White House on gun control, on police reform, on not moving quickly enough with court packing or court reform. These are things progressives want to see happen in addition to the refugee cap, and Biden really has to walk that line between sticking to his campaign promise of being a centrist and unifying president and also not sparking this kind of backlash from progressives.
Yeah, I remember when this refugee issue really popped up, and as you say, seemed to surprise the Biden administration. We had different messages coming just within hours of each other, something we hadn't really seen in the Biden administration to date, where a policy was announced and then it seemed as though there was a move to address some of that very swift criticism that arose. We'll continue to watch that. Meantime, Sarah Mucha, President Biden told reporters that he discussed India's COVID spike with Prime Minister Modi. What is the Biden administration doing to try to help?
That's right. The Biden administration is going to start sharing more vaccine doses globally, but starting specifically with India. I think there's going to be they're going to be sending out the AstraZeneca vaccine, which hasn't been approved by the FDA here, but obviously has been approved in many places globally. And this is going to be something of a game changer for the Biden administration, who has received significant backlash from countries around the world. It's the only one of 4 major global vaccine producers that wasn't also supplying or sending out its doses to other nations. Of course, the requests will keep pouring in even as it starts sending doses to India and beyond. But something that I'm sure the Biden administration will be thinking about as it's starting to share these doses is that China and Russia, the United States' sort of main competitors on the global stage, they've been sharing a pretty significant portion or proportion of their vaccines to nations, even places like Mexico, that's the United States' neighbor. So as these requests start pouring in, I'm sure that the administration will be keeping in mind that something they need to be competitive in is this vaccine distribution globally. It doesn't want to be seen as a hoarder.
Yeah. Nikole, I want to turn to the other side of the aisle here, and I want to ask about the House Republican retreat that is going on this week in Orlando. What are you hearing from Florida, and what can you tell us about former President Trump's absence?
Well, we didn't expect the former president to attend. There was speculation about whether he may pop up or show up, given the fact that he lives in Florida and he's in Mar-a-Lago, which is a couple of 100 miles away. But, that being said, this was designed to be a policy conference and retreat. It's something that House Republicans do every year, so we weren't expecting the former president to be there. However, certainly his shadow loomed large over this conference in a number of ways, specifically as part of this ongoing divide that we have seen acutely within House Republican leadership. And most notably, we've seen, for instance, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and the number 3 Republican in the House, Liz Cheney, kind of really on opposite sides of the fence here when it comes to the former president's role in the party. And so just yesterday, for instance, we heard Congresswoman Cheney say that she believes that Leader McCarthy and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell are the leaders of the Republican Party. Elected leaders are the leaders, if you will, really, as opposed to the former president, who we know is expected to play a pretty large role in the party going forward as it relates to the upcoming midterm elections. And so what was interesting is that when the Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy was asked about some of this today during a media avail, he did suggest that he may or may not support Liz Cheney in the sense that, if the former president endorses a challenger to Liz Cheney. We certainly know that the former president, has criticized Liz Cheney in the past. McCarthy was asked whether he would campaign enthusiastically for Liz Cheney, and he said, well, I haven't talked to her about that. Also, we saw a divide between them on the scope of the January 6th Commission, which is something that's been talked about on the Hill, with Liz Cheney saying that the scope should be very narrow and focus on January 6th versus McCarthy, who has said that he believes it should be broader in scope. So again, we continue to see kind of differences and a divide between these two. And again, the former president, to a certain extent, has been part of that.
So, Sarah Westwood, let me turn to you. Given what Nikole has just laid out here, what are the implications, both short-term and long-term potentially here, because of this ongoing rift between Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney? I mean, if you're rank and file sort of watching this, I imagine, you're essentially being asked to take sides here.
Right, Elaine. Well, in the long term, the problem that Republicans are going to have is they're not going to be able to form a coherent line of attack against the Biden administration and ultimately against the Democrats that they hope to defeat in 2022 if they're still debating among themselves where they should stand on things like January 6th or how much loyalty to Trump should be necessary to be a viable candidate in 2022 and among Republican voters. And I think that the divides here go deeper than just insufficient or sufficient loyalty to Trump or how to handle the January 6th insurrection. McCarthy represents a wing of the party that kind of just wants it to fade into the past. And Cheney represents a much smaller, but also very vocal wing of the party that want to sort of re-examine it and grapple with it before the party can move on. But it's also two totally different styles of governing, styles of politics. McCarthy represents sort of the Trump wing that's more tactical, that's more focused on outcomes and waging these culture wars. And Cheney represents sort of a dying wing of the party that is more ideological, that identifies more closely with some of the old school GOP policies, like taxing less, spending less, and like a more hawkish foreign policy, a more hawkish military policy. So the question there is which of those two approaches to politics will win out at the end of the day. And I think that obviously goes far beyond Trump, but tolerating Trump and continuing to elevating him is one way that you can sort of tell which side of the coin a Republican falls on.
Yeah, I mean, clearly both parties are really grappling with this question of identity, what it is that they stand for, what is it, the direction that they plan on heading in the future. All right, Nikole Killion, Sarah Mucha, and Sarah Westwood, great to see you all. Thank you very much.